Yo guys, Punkrat in the video. So usually I use my intro monologue to sort of set the mood a little bit, get the narrative of the video established, but for this one it's really simple. For Molten Core I made a comprehensive boss guide video. You guys loved it, so of course Blackwing Lair, I'm gonna do the same. We've got a ton to cover, so let's get right into it. Alright, so first up we've got Razer Gore. So Razer Gore has two phases. The first one is the ad phase, and in order to trigger the boss fight, essentially what you need to do is take control of the orb here on the left side of the room. Now the way to do this, or at least the most optimal way to do this, is to have your entire raid rush through and all pop goblin sapper charges at the exact same time. All of the sappers plus AoE going out will pretty much instantly kill all three of the orb protectors at once, and give you and your raid time to set up. Now what you want to do is have your main tank or one of your tanks control the orb. This will initiate the mind control effect on Razer Gore himself and trigger the first phase. The tank that's mind controlling Razer Gore is tasked with destroying all of the eggs. You're going to get a pet bar with all of his abilities, and one of them is going to be destroy egg. You're going to be using this ability on cooldown, going from egg to egg to egg to egg, clearing out the entire room. There's 30 in total. Another interesting thing that you could do, but it's not 100% necessary, is Razer Gore can actually hibernate dragonkins. So there's going to be dragonkins spawning on all sides, and you can, if you want, hibernate them. But basically your focus is just to destroy the 30 eggs as quickly as possible. Now outside of that, you want to split up your raid into 4 groups, with equal DPS split up in all 4 quadrants. These groups are tasked with killing the ads as they come out, so you'll get orc mages, orc elite warriors, and dragonkins all coming out. You want to have quasi tanks at each spot. Doesn't have to be an actual tank, a Fury Warrior is fine, but just make sure there's somebody there to pseudo tank the targets, especially the dragonkins as they come out. Alternatively, what you can do is have hunters and mages kite the dragonkins with distracting shot and rank 1 frostbolt or whatever it is to buy time if your DPS is not good enough or your healers are struggling to keep up with the dragonkin damage. But the idea is to basically split up into those 4 spots and just kill the ads as they come out and keep up with the pace. Now once the mind controller of the orb has cleared all of the eggs out of the way, it transitions into phase 2, and all of the ads that are left over from phase 1, you don't have to worry about them, they're just all gonna run out of the room. Now phase 2 is pretty simple. The tank who is mind controlling with the orb is most likely gonna get threat first thing. You want this tank to pull Razer Gore right over here, and you want your range group to stand at the pillar at the back over here. The reason you want your range group here is because every now and then, Razer Gore is going to cast a fireball volley. Whenever the volley goes off, the range group is going to hide behind the pillar, avoid the damage, and then come out to DPS again. That's basically the entire limbo of phase 2. When it comes to melee, you want to have a free action potion. So Razer Gore is going to do a war stomp around him that does a nasty stun. I think it lasts around 5 seconds. So melee DPS and tanks, you guys want to pop a free action potion heading into phase 2 and just nuke down and avoid getting stunned the entire time. The second mechanic is conflag or conflagrate, and this is going to be an AoE cone in front of the boss that's going to hit the main tank exactly like on General Drakaseth at the end of UBRS, and when that happens you just want the off tank to pick it up and make sure you heal the main tank through the conflag dot damage. Deal with all of these mechanics, it's pretty simple, and you've now completed Razer Gore. Alright, second boss, we've got Strads the Corrupt, one of the original guild killers. This is a DPS race, and it can actually be quite difficult if your guild's not up to snuff. So Strads is going to be laying dormant in the next room, and he's actually going to be a friendly target to interact with. You want to have your main tank once again interact with the RP element. This is because Strads is going to aggro 30 seconds after you engage with him, and he's going to target whoever spoke to him. So you want to have your main tank speak first, that way he doesn't turn around and face the raid, potentially fire breath, or just create a messy scenario off the pull. He's going to start off at 30% HP, so he's right near execute range right off the bat. The idea is to kill him as fast as possible. That's the #1 focus. You cannot sustain through this boss fight for very long, no matter what, just based off of the mechanics. The first one that we have is Essence of the Red, and this is applied to everybody in the raid wide. It gives you unlimited resources, meaning if you're a rogue, you have unlimited energy to continuously backstab or sinister strike over and over again, giving you infinite combo points. As a warrior, you have endless rage, meaning you can endlessly pump out as much damage as you want, and all mana users, you have infinite mana, so you can just, especially as healers, spam the max rank of your spell. The next mechanic is called Burning Adrenaline. and this is basically like a Baron Geddon bomb. It gets targeted to one member in the raid, and after the duration of the debuff, you're gonna explode, except it's a little bit different in the sense that it allows you to instant cast spells. So as a mage, if you get it, you can start running away from the raid, but at the same time, let off instant cast frostbolts the entire time, one after another on each global cooldown. And healers, you could do the exact same thing. You could go to a safe spot away from the raid and just spam instant cast max rank heals on the main tank over and over again. Eventually, if you're unlucky or if you're not doing it fast enough, doing the boss fight fast enough, your main tank is going to get burning adrenaline and he is going to die no matter what he does. And another element that burning adrenaline does that I forgot to mention is it reduces your health pool for the duration that it lasts on you. So on interval, it's going to be dropping down your total amount of health. So you might have 6,000 health going in. By the end of burning adrenaline, you might have 300 and then you're just gonna die. So the longer that it lasts on the tank, the more susceptible he is to just basically getting one shot by the boss and dying before the burning adrenaline actually explodes him. This is where obviously you need to have an off tank ready to pick it up, but you can't taunt the boss. So the off tank needs to be second on threat, hopefully. Your off tank should most likely be dual wielding, or if a Fury Warrior ends up having second threat, pop on a shield and assume position as the tank. Use shield wall, do what you gotta do to survive. A really good tip that I can give you guys is Fury Warriors, you guys want to be very careful with your threat. A way to manage it is to actually not use Heroic Strike. So you're going to have endless rage. You don't want to spam Heroic Strike. In fact, you want to spam single target cleaves. It sounds counterintuitive, but Heroic Strike on its tooltip generates extra threat. You want the off tank to be spamming Heroic Strikes with the main tank, and all the other warriors you should be using cleave in your rotation. Rogues of course vanish. Casters, you can maybe have a lip if things get spicy. Hunters feign death, and just manage your threat. But if your DPS is strong enough, you're just gonna kill him really fast, especially if you have a ton of warriors. Once you get to execute phase, you can just drop him real quick. Okay, so the next boss, we've got Broodlord Lair. Now, half of Broodlord Lair, half of the encounter is the suppression room. I made a video covering the suppression room, so if you guys are interested in how to tackle that, you can go ahead and watch that video. I'm not going to cover it here. But if we pick up at the end of that video, once you head into Broodlord Lair, into the encounter, it's really a tank healing fight and a delicate balance of threat once again, which is a recurring theme in Blackwing Lair throughout. You want to have all of your tanks together with the main tank who's tanking Broodlord against the wall over here at the end of the suppression room. Then you want to place all of your range at the opposing end with their backs to the wall right next to this pillar, and have all of your melee right behind Broodlord, but angled in a way where their back is against the wall, so that once he uses his blast wave and knocks everyone back, it doesn't send anybody flying into the suppression room, aggroing whelps, into the aura, or just in general losing DPS from people flying away. So Broodlord has 4 mechanics. The first one is a blast wave like I just mentioned, which is going to knock people back. The second is cleave. The third is Mortal Strike, which is a big reason why this is a tank healing intensive fight. And the fourth is the most important, it's called Knock Away. So he's going to use Knock Away on the main tank, the person or the highest threat target rather. And after he uses this, it's going to reduce that target's threat by 50%. This means, once again, you want your off tanks to be secondary on threat. A lot of you guilds out there, you might want to take it slow. You might want to start with your ranged group just wanding for the first like 10 to 20% of the fight, melee DPS just auto attacking, and just have all of your tanks generate as much threat as possible so that when you actually start doing damage and the first knockback goes off, he's going to switch to your off tank instead of one of the DPS, making it a really messy encounter. But that's pretty much the entire fight. Keep the tanks alive, make sure that they have the top threat positions on the list, keep it steady, and eventually he'll die. Alright, next we've got what generally people refer to as the loot pinatas, the Black Drakes. First on the list is Firemother. So Firemother is padding in this room right over here, right after you kill Broodlord Lair. You're going to want to pull Firemother basically right here outside of the gate. There's a little tunnel with again another gate, and you want your tank to just tuck himself in one of the little cubbies here, ready to pull the boss. This is the first boss where you need your entire raid to equip their Onyxia Scale Cloak, because this boss casts an ability called Shadow Flame. Shadow Flame is a frontal AoE shadow spell, basically a shadow breath, that'll deal a ton of damage and then put a dot on the target. Having a cloak equipped will reduce the amount of damage that you take from the breath and make you immune to the dot that follows. even with the cloak, if the boss turns around, if somebody pulls aggro and the boss flame breaths, half of your raid will most likely die immediately. And once again, this boss has an ability which reduces threat on the main tank, so that scenario is actually very common where he'll turn around, target a mage, and wipe out the entire raid. So all three of the Black Drakes have an ability called Wing Buffet, which is casted on interval. Wing Buffet is an AoE frontal cone knockback which will reduce the threat of anybody who gets hit by it, which is hopefully just going to be your main tank in front. There's a couple ways that you can deal with this mechanic. The first is right before Wing Buffet goes off, you have an off tank come in, taunt the boss, take the Wing Buffet, and then the main tank will taunt it back. Yes, these bosses are tauntable. Alternatively, you could have the Wing Buffet go off, and right as it goes off, you have the off tank at the exact split second of the Wing Buffet being released, taunt it, gain aggro, and establish the main tank position. What strategy you use is really up to you, although I'd probably suggest doing the second one where you're doing a tank swap, because this boss also has an ability called Flame Buffet. Flame Buffet is a raid-wide AoE ability that leaves a debuff on the target that stacks up infinitely. Everybody in the raid is going to be hit by a fire blast basically, which is going to leave a debuff on them that makes them take more fire damage the more it stacks. So once you get to like 11-12 stacks, the Flame Buffet is going to take a huge chunk out of your health pool and the healers won't be able to keep up. So everybody during this fight is going to be taking X amount of Flame Buffets, maybe like 6 to 8 stacks, hiding until all of the Flame Buffets drop off and then coming back. And you're going to be doing this the entire time. Make sure that you first aid every single time you're hiding. You want to be helping the healers. First aid is super important in Blackwing Lair. And this is why you might want to actually tank swap when the Wing Buffet goes off so that your main tank can drop the Flame Buffet stacks and then swap, come back in, and then the off tank is going to go and drop his. Now another thing that you're probably going to have to do if you're not killing Firemother quick enough is have 2 healer groups, and this is obviously to deal again with the Flame Buffet. You're going to want to have healer group A, which is comprised of half of the healers, and healer group B, which is comprised with the second half. They're going to keep swapping, so the first group is going to come out, they're going to get maybe 6 to 8 Flame Buffet stacks, then they're going to hide, the second group is going to come out, and you're just going to keep that balancing act going the entire time, while melee and ranged DPS is doing the exact same thing, avoiding taking too many Flame Buffet stacks and bandaging once they wrap around. Alternatively, there is actually a spot where the healers can be in line of sight of the tank but out of line of sight of the dragon, making it so that they don't have to move at all, but I'll leave that one up to you and your guild to find that perfect positioning. So next on the list, we've got Eamon Rock. Eamon Rock shares a couple of the same abilities. He's got a Wing Buffet, meaning he's going to drop aggro on the tank who's tanking him, and he's got obviously the Shadow Flame. What makes him different is his ability called Shadow of Eamon Rock. So every 8 seconds, this boss is going to cast a debuff on your main tank, which cannot be dispelled, decursed, or anything. Once it applies onto the main tank, every time he hits that target, he's going to heal for 25,000 HP. So you guessed it, what do? Every single time it's applied onto your main tank, the off tank is going to taunt the boss, assume position. Then once Shadow of Eamon Rock goes on the off tank, the main tank or maybe the tertiary tank is going to taunt off. You want to have a rotation between them, make sure they're all communicating. Taunt it off the debuff tank so Eamon Rock doesn't heal himself, and just keep doing that. The one place where it gets a little bit iffy is that you also have to deal with Wing Buffet. So aggro is going to be dropping from the Wing Buffet. Sometimes they might go off at the same time. So just make sure that your tanks are coordinating this properly. Although, don't panic if a taunt gets resisted or if something messes up. Even if Eamon Rock heals a little bit from hitting on the Shadow of Eamon Rock for 25,000 on the hit, you can still manage to kill the fight. You'll be okay. So just make sure that you keep calm, communicate all of the swaps, and you're going to be totally fine. It's a really easy fight. All right, so the next one that we've got is Flame Gore, and this might be the easiest Drake of all. It's basically the same thing. He has Shadow Flame, a Wing Buffet, and then the only other mechanic that he has is Fire Nova. So on interval, Flame Gore is going to become enraged. When he gets enraged, he's going to start spamming a Fire Nova that hits the raid. Honestly, it doesn't even do that much damage. Easily enough, hunters can tranquilizing shot the target and disable the Fire Nova. So you basically just want to have 3 hunters that are just casting their own trank shot in a coordinated manner with a rotation and making sure that the Fire Nova is instantly disabled the moment he goes into that state. It's honestly brain dead easy. Tank the dragon, deal with the tank swap, and just trank shot on rotation to get the Fire Nova off. One thing to keep in mind with all 3 of these bosses, especially since I don't think Deadly Boss Mods is going to be working too well the first week, every single time Wing Buffet is about to go off, there's going to be an emote in the chat that says Flame Gore, Firemother, Eamon Rock is casting Wing Buffet, and that's when you know aggro is about to drop. So you can, I guess, look at your chat emote to know when things are happening. Okay, so here we go. Those were the 3 easiest bosses. Now here are the 2 hardest ones. The last 2, Magus and Nefarian. Firstly, Magus. There's actually a lot to talk about here. There's a lot of little things that you have to micromanage throughout the entire fight. Firstly, let's talk about his big breaths, or his abilities that affect the entire raid that create the dance that you have to execute on the entire time. The first is Incinerate. He's going to cast a frontal cone fire breath that's going to deal from 3 to 4k damage. He's got Corrosive Acid, which is again a frontal breath that's going to leave a dot and reduce the armor for the duration of the debuff. He's got Frostburn, which is a frontal frost breath that's going to heavily reduce attack speed. He's got Ignite Flesh, which is another fire breath that's going to continuously deal a small amount of fire damage. And keep in mind that this can stack, so if you get hit by a second one, it's going to go to 2 stacks and keep dealing more and more damage. And then the last one is Time Lapse, which is something that you do not want to get. This is by far the hardest mechanic to deal with. Out of these 5 breaths, you can only get 2. So each instance ID, each raid ID, Magus is going to have 2 affixes. He might have Incinerate and Corrosive Acid, he might have Frostburn and Incinerate, Frostburn and Ignite Flesh, or he might have Time Lapse and something else. He's going to cast one of these breaths every 30 seconds. And essentially what you need to do is hide before he casts it. So you'll pull the boss. After 25 seconds of engaging the boss, everyone's going to hide around the wall here while the boss is being tanked right over here. And it's very delicate that your tank actually backpedals. And yes, I said backpedal. This is one of those scenarios where backpedaling is actually one of the best ways to tackle the pull. You want to backpedal to the little texture slip right over here, this line, and have the boss placed perfectly right there in between the arch. The range group is going to hide around this corner, and the melee group is going to go in this little cubby over here. 5 to 10 seconds before every single breath, everyone's going to hide. Healers are going to have loss on the tank, so you want to continuously keep the tank up. Everyone else, you're just hiding. Now, why time lapse is such a pain is because if you read it, it says stuns for 6 seconds for anybody who gets caught in it, leaves the player with half health, and reduces their threat permanently. Your main tank cannot get out of this, meaning your main tank is going to permanently lose all of his threat. When you get time lapse, you have to be extremely careful with the damage that you deal, and you have to make sure that you have 3 tanks, potentially even 4, with like a Fury Warrior tank or something, that are always the top threat targets, meaning when the main tank gets hit by time lapse, there's always going to be a second tank that can come in and take his place. You're dealing with everything, and then also dealing with, again, a threat drop mechanic. You have to be super careful with the amount of damage that people are dealing with, and take it as a war of attrition where you're doing this fight extremely slowly. But hopefully you don't get that, and it's basically just a balancing act, a limbo where you're hiding, coming out, hiding, coming out. The next mechanics that he has are debuffs. So he's got afflictions. He's got Affliction Red, which is a disease, dealing fire damage. He's got Affliction Green, which is a poison, reducing healing by 50% and dealing nature damage. Affliction Blue, which drains mana, increases attack speed, and slows your movement speed. He's got a Curse, which increases fire damage taken by 100%. And then he's got the Bronze Affliction, which cannot be dispelled at all by anybody, and periodically will stun you for 4 seconds. In order to get rid of the Bronze debuff, you have to have Hourglass Sand, which drops off of the trash mobs before Magus. First week of Blackwing Lair, you're probably not going to have too many of them, to be completely honest. So you're probably going to want to put most of them on your main tank. This means everybody else is going to be dealing with being periodically stunned for 4 seconds over and over again. If you have a bronze debuff, make sure that you give yourself a little bit of a heavier leeway when hiding from breaths. Don't stick out to where there's 3 seconds left for you to hide. You probably want to leave around 8 seconds just in case you get stunned. You have extra time to make it to the wall. For the other debuffs, just mages, druids, paladins, priests, make sure you guys are dispelling everything. If you're not, what ends up happening is if somebody gets every single affliction, meaning red, green, blue, black, and bronze, you're going to get morphed into a wormkin and start attacking the raid. This basically never happens, but it can happen, so just make sure you're dispelling people. We're not done. The next mechanic that you have to deal with is a frenzy. So just like Magmadar, Magus is going to go into a frenzied state every 15 seconds. He's going to go into a frenzy right after he casts his breath, meaning right when you pop out, you have to have a hunter trank shot it, and then halfway through to the next breath, he's going to go frenzy again. Another hunter has to disable that one. You want to have at least 3 to 4 hunters on this fight just to compensate for the fact that sometimes hunters are going to have the bronze debuff, they're going to get stunned, and they won't be able to tranquilizing shot the frenzy. But it's super important. This boss hits like a truck when he has frenzy on, so make sure that your hunters are on point, coordinating who's trank shotting when. when and getting it the moment it pops up. The next mechanic that we have, yes, there's more, are spell vulnerabilities. So baseline, this boss takes pretty much no damage from all spell schools. Meaning if you're a mage and you cast a Frostbolt, it's going to do maybe 10% of what it should do. So you don't want to be doing damage unless he's vulnerable to a specific school of magic. So on interval, he's going to be resistant to all schools of magic except for one where he's going to be vulnerable to. You want all of your casters to be using rank 1 versions of their spells. Essentially what you're doing is you're fishing for what the spell vulnerability is. Once someone's used a rank 1 Frostbolt, and instead of hitting for 100 damage, it hits for like 400 damage, you know that he's vulnerable to frost damage. This is where people start using frost spells. If somebody identifies that it's nature damage, hunters can use Serpent Sting, druids can use Insect Swarm, things like that. And it's really a communication game where people are trying to fish for what the spell vulnerability is, communicate what it is, and then do damage based on that call. And keep in mind, again, it's constantly changing, so it can go fire, then it can go shadow, nature, arcane, frost, or it can go shadow 3 times in a row. He's going to be constantly changing what school of magic he's vulnerable to. Now, the last mechanic that he has is an enrage. A soft enrage at 20%. So at 20% HP, the boss gets super pissed, grows in size, goes red, and just starts clobbering your main tank. This you want to have your main tank have a stone shield potion for, have his finger ready to click last stand, ready to click shield wall, whatever it is. You might want to have a paladin cast lay on hands to get the increased armor on your main tank as well. And also a key thing that you can control is get the boss to maybe 22% and just stop DPS. Wait till you identify a strong spell school vulnerability, so maybe frost or fire, so your mages can just absolutely rip and do like 4,000 damage frost bolts back to back, so you can nuke him down and get him through that enrage phase really quickly. Maybe try to time it to where a breath just went off, so you have the 30-second timer to just go all in with a good spell school vulnerability, and make sure that you get rid of the frenzy extremely quickly or even preemptively. If you can line up all 3 of these mechanics, you're going to get yourself in the most comfortable stage at 20%. So just coordinate that, and trust me, it's actually very important, and you might wipe if you don't take that into consideration. But that's Magus. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Dealing with every single one of those mechanics all at once is this boss fight. Okay, now, last on the list, we've got Nefarian. Nefarian, similar to Razer Gore, has 2 phases. The first phase is the add phase, and essentially, you're going to have 2 sides of the room where you want to split your DPS in 1 and 2 groups. Keep in mind, you want to have your mages all stacked on one group though, because one of those sides is going to be resistant to frost damage. They're going to have like the blue dragonkins or the blue wormkins. So you want to have both of your groups start in the middle, and then you identify where the frost resistant side is and send your mages to the opposite side and the other group to the opposing. The adds are just going to keep coming out. You just kill them as they come. You might want to pop a shadow protection potion before going in, just because Lord Victor Nefarious is going to be in his human form, and he's going to be casting shadow bolt volleys and just kind of walking around and, casting shadow bolt volleys. After about a minute and a half, a minute 45 seconds, the boss is going to start coming down. Nefarian in his dragon state. This is a true war of attrition. He has a huge, and I mean massive, health pool. And for the most part, in terms of positioning, it's kind of like a tank and spank, but you're dealing with a lot of mechanics at the same time. The first is the main tank is going to be getting cursed periodically, and that's going to reduce the incoming healing on the main tank by 75%. Make sure you have a mage who's close enough. Make sure you have a druid that's ready to decurse it the moment it comes up. Secondly, the boss, just like Onyxia, is going to cast an AoE fear that only affects people within a 30-yard radius around him. This is every 30 seconds. You could have Tremor Totem, the warrior can stance dance it, and on the alliance side, you want to make sure that you're cycling fear wards on the main tank consistently. As for ranged DPS, you guys can just stand out of range of the fear, don't worry about it. Unless you're decursing, just stay inside, but try to be a little bit far away from Nefarian's head because you can get feared into a cleave and die. So it's just about keeping your main tank stable and slowly whittling the boss down. The next mechanics that you have to deal with are the class calls. So every 25 to 35 seconds, he's going to do a class call. So based on a specific class, he's going to introduce a new mechanic to the fight. For warriors, he's going to force all warriors into berserker stance. This means your main tank is going to be pulling less threat and taking more damage since he's non-defensive. Just make sure you keep the tank alive, you're good to go. With warlocks, he's going to make them summon an infernal, 1 infernal per warlock. You can just kill the Infernals, or you can keep them banished. It's up to you. On certain private servers, you were able to enslave them, but I'm pretty sure on Classic you cannot do that because people have been testing around trying to enslave Infernals around the world and it doesn't work, but we'll see. For Shamans, he's going to do something called Corrupted Totems, which is going to summon powerful versions of Shaman's various totems that'll buff Nefarian and do damage to the raid. For Rogues, he's just going to teleport them all in front of Nefarian and keep them immobilized, meaning they're going to be in cleave range and in breath range. Tank, you just want to move away from the Rogues because they're actually going to be immobilized completely. For Paladins, he's going to literally bop himself. He's going to put a Blessing of Protection on himself and be completely immune to physical damage, so Rogues and Warriors just get out of the fear range, wait for it to fall off, and then go back in. For Priest, he's going to do something called Corrupted Healing, where every single time you heal somebody, it's going to put a debuff on them that stacks, that makes them take about 50 damage per second, stacking up to 50 times, so the heals that you apply to your teammates will actually hurt them, especially if you stack it up too many times. For mages, this is the most annoying one. He's just going to start polymorphing random people all over the raid. He's going to turn you into all kinds of different animals like cows and worms and giraffes. When this happens, on private servers at least, we used to have the mages all blink behind the throne and go LOS, and it would affect less people. Not sure how it's going to be in Classic, but this is by far the most annoying class call. Mage class calls are constantly interrupting spell casts and sheeping your main tank, causing him to lose aggro. It becomes really messy. So we'll see actually how we're going to deal with this on Classic, but for now the strategy is to have your mages all blink away as far as possible so that they're not affecting the raid with Wild Polymorph. Hunters, he's going to break your ranged weapon. So you want to have a second, you want to maybe get the AV bow or the Strathholm bow and just swap it on because he's going to literally break your Rock Dalar. And for Druids, he's going to force you into cat form for 30 seconds. You cannot get out of cat form. This is actually pretty important because Druids are decursing the main tank. So at this point, mages, you need to make sure that you're decursing the main tank immediately and picking up for the slack of the Druids being unable to do so. So it's basically dealing with all of those class calls. Can get a little bit messy, but for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. At 20%, what's going to happen is he's going to reanimate all of the Wormkins that you killed in the first phase. Every single one of them are going to come up as a reanimated skeleton and charge the raid. At this point, you want to have Paladins, if you're on Alliance side, bop all of your strongest mages. Mages and Warlocks, you also want to have a LIP, a limited invulnerability potion, on hand, ready to go so you can get immunity. All charge in, big time AoE all of them so that you're immune to all of the incoming damage, and they all pretty much die instantly. One thing that I'd say is super important, you want your raid to be doing Strathholm before BWL comes out so that everyone has Strathholm Holy Water. If everybody has the Holy Water, you can all just switch to all the reanimated skeletons, drop the bombs on them all at once, and they're instantly going to get evaporated. You've dealt with the reanimated skeletons, back to the boss, War of Attrition. Eventually, if you're stable enough, you'll kill it. Whew! Okay, every time I make one of these videos, these long-winded, super intense videos covering a million different things, I get a crazy headache at the end. I'm sure this is going to be maybe even like a 30-minute video, like 20-25 minutes, so I'm going to keep it swift at the end here. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped you guys. There's a lot of really interesting mechanics that make Blackwing Lair a lot more enticing as a raid encounter than Molten Core, and that gets even better the more phases that get released in Classic. So I'm super excited for BWL. I hope you guys are as well. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like, comment, subscribe. You know the drill. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.